Okay, good afternoon. So we're going to be doing a series of videos that's really meant to function as reminders to myself regarding things that I easily forget in terms of setting up a very beautiful media server with an organized library that names itself, where you can grab things from the trackers that you want to grab it from, and everything works really nicely. So this series of tutorials is really for myself. So there might be certain excess information that, while may not be applicable to you, is extremely useful to me in the future. But it can also help to, prevent any issues. Now, one thing these tutorials isn't going to do is cover installation steps. It's not going to cover any of that. It's just going to cover the concepts of what these things are, a rough idea of how to kind of set it up based on the current information, and really any issues that happen that I wasn't able to Google or figure out. So the first thing that we want to do in terms of the server is we want to install several things. Now, in the past, I've done it manually where you have to install librtorrent, the root torrent, var www, into that, Apache 2 web server, Heimdall, RPC2, SCGI, all this stuff manually. Everything was very manual, upgrading the dependencies. There were guides, but it was very complex. So thankfully for Ubuntu and Debian, that has all been replaced by something called SWIZZIN. Now, we're also going to cover something called Docker. And if you're not familiar with what Docker is, we'll cover certain functions of certain tools, but not in-depth instructions for those tools. So things that were led to very aha moments, I'm going to cover, at least for myself. So SWIZZIN is a community tool, and it's only for Ubuntu and Debian. But essentially what it is, as you can see, it has this beautiful GUI panel. It gives system overviews, and it has community apps like Jacket, Mango, Sonar, Radar, RootTorrent, all this stuff. But it automates it with ease and confidence. So little skills is necessary. That's true. You don't really need a lot of skills. It is considered an AIO, or all-in-one solution, which I'm not a fan of, but the SWIZZIN team really just tries to replicate the bare metal installs of all these things. So it bases it off of how the developers say to install it, but it automates it. So it's not trying to do its own thing necessarily. And the way you start SWIZZIN is you basically start it by doing a bash curl, or you could do curl or wget, doesn't really matter which. I think I did curl. And then it'll ask you, let's boost this page up a little bit. There we go. It'll ask you a username for the master user and a password for the master user. So the master user is, let's say, something other than the root. I didn't try it for that root, but for myself, it was just, my name. The password for the master user. Now, I thought that SWIZZIN's password is different to this when it asks, what's the password that you want? No, it changes the master user password. So whatever you might have had for the password on Debian for that specific user, remember that when you do SWIZZIN, it actually changes that user's password on the Debian client. So then I was locked out. So that's one realization that was a problem. Apt update and apt upgrade, apt update, apt upgrade, apt get, or apt get update and apt get upgrade. These are those things for Debian that you really want to know. You also want to know apt get purge, how to purge, things that your system just isn't using, or dependency, because you removed one type of package from Debian, that these little dependencies that it installs isn't sticking around. So there's that might be a separate video, but let's stick to SWIZZIN here. So the next step is box basics. Again, if you type box, and I'll show it right here, but if I type box, I get this sort of window. And again, you know, you can go down, you can hit the space key to select things and install them, and the tab would switch down. Cancel, exit. So that's what this is all covering. Obviously, you can do box install manually. You don't have to use the GUI that they give. You can update box. So, I mean, I could try that right now. Box update. Updating SWIZZIN local repository, performing app update, fixing Nginx, fixing fancy index, latest commit pulled. So, restarting panel. So there we go. It's installed all of the box stuff, and that's been, you know, updated. So again, this does not upgrade versions of the applications. To do that, you have to go box upgrade application. There's a list here of which ones you can actually upgrade. Here's the link to that if you want to check it out yourself. But in general, you can upgrade the panel. You can upgrade Plex, RTorrent, RuTorrent, Sonar. The big, they're called star apps. You can update those. AutoDL is another one. I didn't install it because I don't play the racing game with trackers, so it's a losing battle to try to do auto download and rushing to get the latest FLAC or something. I don't know. Not for me. And of course, you can add user to the server, delete users, change password. And they do say here, this will change the password for SSH FTP. So initially I didn't read that correctly. So again, you can do box test, but that's not necessary. Let's get to what really occurs though. Now, one thing I want to say is that if you do box, let's say if you install everything, you install RTorrent as the download client, okay? And you really need their little instructional because it tells you how to also restart the services, how to like connect to other clients, you know, what you want to put for the RPC mount, right? So that the web server can speak to the socket of the system and they tell you, okay, this is what you want to reference in terms of the RPC mount, the username. This is actually important, this one, for RTorrent, because when you get to Radar here and you go to download clients and you go to RTorrent, right kind of around here is where you want to make sure you're following this stuff. So again, you can see it says 127.0.0.1, 443. And I think if I did 127 here, I hit test, it works. So that's the bind address. Again, remember, a bind address is literally some kind of address that an application listens on. So I don't know why Photoshop just opened, but I want to close that actually. So bind address is basically where if you type netstat pln, this will show you the bind addresses or the local address that a program is on. So if we take a look, Radar is binded to 127.0.0.1. That's the network interface. 0.0.0.0 means it's listening for any and all IP addresses versus just the local host. So it's listening on port 5055 on any and every IP address. And this is actually Overseer. But you can see it says Docker proxy because Overseer is in a Docker. We'll cover Docker later. Let's stick to SWIZZIN. So if you install RTorrent, okay, you install Sonar, you install Radar, you install everything other than RuTorrent, and you don't install, then you won't need a web server called Nginx, okay? The web server handles load, like reverse proxy, and it handles serving your web page. That's the official way you say it, serving the web page. So RuTorrent has like, you know, it's like, if you look at the original RuTorrent, it's like a var www.html. You need a web server to serve it on your IP address so that it can know to route to /RuTorrent, like, you know, like like a reverse proxy. And we'll cover that as well in another video. But you won't need Nginx or any web server for RooTorrent. I mean, if you don't install RooTorrent, you won't need it. The minute you, so if you don't do that, RTorrent and all these other apps, they're accessible like they normally are from a manual bare metal install. So Radar would be your local IP, right? 192 point whatever, 0.9, and then colon 7878. But the minute you install RooTorrent, okay, Nginx installs itself. And what happens is, I want to show you guys that what actually occurs onto the server, etc. Nginx. I don't know why I keep saying Nginx, but Nginx. And if you go to sites enabled, this is what Nginx uses. So we'll open it up and hit edit. So I do actually want to cover this, but because it's important. And this is also kind of covering reverse proxy in a way, I guess. But this is called a server block. Okay. And a server block defines what server to listen on and what port. So this, if this local machine is listening on port 80, which is HTTP, the default server is the IP of the machine, right? Then it's saying, okay, so for anything that's asking for, IP of the machine, whatever that is, /.well-known, do this. And if it's just the IP of the machine, return a 301 and send it. So 301 is a redirect to HTTPS. So the minute you put install RooTorrent with SWIZZIN, something I think is really important to know is that you will no longer be able to do HTTP ... / on your server. So RooTorrent, and I forget what the reason is, but the SWIZZIN person told me, but what the reason is that, they do this on purpose to streamline it, and they change it so that every app becomes HTTPS ... / IP address. And there's no more and then what it also installs as well is apps, this apps folder. This is important. We're going to look at this. But the SSL configuration you can see right here. So anytime you enter something with HTTP, it's basically saying send it here to this server block. Now this server block is saying, okay, I'm listening on 443. Here are my certificates. This is important. Notice the name of these certificates, Snake Oil. So so this is the private key, and then this is the actual certificate, Snake Oil. Okay. So these are fake. I mean, they're technically considered legit certificates, but they have no CA or certificate authority verifying that a DNS challenge has passed. So in a way, it's kind of saying, hey, I'm my own domain name server, right? Something that assigns a .com or a domain name to an IP of a machine. It's basically saying I'm my own certificate authority, and I own myself. I own the domain. Because remember, an SSL certificate is simply just saying I own this domain. I own the computer that owns, I own this domain, and this as the computer that you're challenging, I am authorized to do stuff to this domain. So whatever the IP address. So it prevents man-in-the-middle attacks. But so anyways, once this is all done, notice that the location, this rule just says never allow anyone to access a HT password file or anything. And one thing I want to cover while I can remember is, again, HT password, you want to do something called NBB, something like, or I forget what it is here, but it's I'm pretty sure it's NBB, but let me type HT password help. NBB. So HT password N means don't write to a file. B means just use what I'm saying on the command prompt. And capital B means force the encryption. So HT password, NBB, and lowercase b, capital B, user password. So this means don't create a file. But if you wanted to create a file, then you would just get rid of the N, you put BB, and then you just put, for example, file, the location of the file, mount HD password file, like this, right? And then if you were to do it, it would probably create it. Alternatively, if you just type, let's say, file name here, it will create it on your root folder. So wherever this root folder is. So that's important to know. But look at this thing. It says include everything that has a configuration file under apps. So this now are the reverse proxies. Okay, so you can technically do a reverse proxy right in here, but the way SWIZZIN does it, it says, okay, go to this folder. Let's take a look at a really easy one. Let's take a look at roottorrent. What's going on here? And again, so you can see, well, roottorrent's a little more complex. So let's take a look at, for example, panel. Where is that panel? So panel is basically this. This is the panel, okay? And notice the link, HTTPS 192.168.1.8. This is my local instance, but the panel for tester here, this is a GUI. You have to install this module. That's another thing I didn't realize in SWIZZIN. You must install this module, but the panel is essentially what does the the GUI. So this panel, as you can see, it's just every location. So whatever the base URL is, it will automatically just take you to panel. So it's saying, oh, rewrite it as /panel. Okay. And the proxy is, it's like it listens to panel on port 8333. So this is the bind port. So if we look at netstat PLN, you'll see that, yeah, the bind address is 127.0.0.1 8333333. So that's the bind address. So the bind address is different than what the address is that you used to access the web server. The bind address is always a bind address. That's separate from what you type in on a URL. So you're probably like, well, hold on, how come I can't type HTTP 127, this 833? Because remember, when you do roottorrent or Nginx, though I believe it's the minute you install roottorrent is when it changes everything. But I believe if you just install Nginx and everything else, then probably not. It doesn't go to 443, but you have to check that. But the bind port is different. So if it wasn't HTTPS, these rules wouldn't be there. Then yeah, you could go to the 833 and the panel should pop up. But it's not going to do that. It's only going to now refer to /panel. So the reverse proxy for, let's say, radar, this one's really important. So this one's saying, hey, look, for whatever location, this means, I believe this means a current home directory. So whatever it is, so if the location is the main URL /radar, I want you to proxy pass this address, which is 7878. So again, and we're also, it says allow the API external access via Nginx. So this is available. I'm not entirely too sure what this is, but anyways, you can see the reverse proxy rules here are set. So that's something important to know for SWIZZIN, is that it does change these things. So all of a sudden you can't really just go to, here's another thing. Here's another one. Jacket, location jacket, return 301, redirect it to /jacket. And then this location /jacket will proxy pass to this IP address and this locate. So this one's a little confusing, but /jacket. So it's not just an IP address. So this one's like, hey, if they just type /jacket, really the location is /jacket /. I don't know why that's important, but you can see it says 127.0.0, 9117. So that's kind of important as well. So once you got all that installed with SWIZZIN, it's pretty easy to maintain all these star apps. And just one thing to, again, remember is, again, look at that https ... // not http 192.168.1.8 7878. See how that doesn't work? It's timing out, not HTTP. See, that one doesn't work. So you're like, what's going on here? Because, if it's 127.0.0.1, why can't I access it? Remember, the bind address is not the same as this address. So, again, if it's 127.0.0.1, it means localhost, right? But again, it's not necessarily gonna work. Now let's look at Jacket. Again, the way the URL is set up is, HTTP won't work. So if I do HTTP /jacket, see, it goes back to HTTPS. But if I do HTTP /jacket, same thing. So notice it keeps going to that redirect. And so that's pretty much a SWIZZIN overview in terms of how SWIZZIN works. There's one thing is that, if you look at the certificates of these things, it says not secure. And look at certificates. So this is right from the computer, issued by the computer, right? So it can tell that these are like not real. These are snake oil, right? Like a snake oil salesman. So if you wanted to do something where it does offer, instead it says secure and it is offering certificates, you want to install Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt is essentially the authority that issues certificates via acme.sh. There is a modified acme.sh file that's supposed to handle subdomains, so star.domain.com, that issues certificates for those. Because remember, a domain and its subdomains usually have the same exact certificate. So all the subdomains should be issued if you did it that way. But so again, here you could set it up with, DDNS like DuckDNS or Cloudflare, or you could even, do a really cooler one, which is Cloudflare tunnels, basically. Essentially like basically a VPN, Cloudflare VPN. Then you don't have to worry about, domain name stuff and like how to like reference and all that with a reverse proxy, essentially with like a reverse proxy thing. And we're going to cover traffic and all that later. But once you install Let's Encrypt, there is a modified version of this acme.sh. Ask in the SWIZZIN Discord that handles that. But apparently the configuration files are in root and the Nginx SSL directory. So that in a nutshell is all of that. You can install some other stuff here. And again, we're not going to cover that part. I just really wanted to cover what happens with 443, that kind of stuff, general overview of SWIZZIN, and that's about it.